Welcome back to the Best You podcast. In today's episode, I'm super excited because we're diving deep into mental health with someone who knows it inside and out, which is Patrick J. Kennedy. He's a former congressman, mental health advocate, and one of the nephews of John F. Kennedy. That's right, President JFK. Patrick shares powerful insights on why mental health isn't just something to, quote, fix, but something to build on and grow as a source of strength. We'll talk about handling intrusive thoughts, creating a solid emotional foundation for your family, and supporting loved ones through their mental health journeys and struggles. By the end of this conversation, you're going to have practical tools and a new perspective on mental health as a journey of resilience and growth. Before we dive in, if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe down below. All right, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Best You podcast. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Patrick J. Kennedy. Patrick, I'm super excited about our conversation. We were originally scheduled for a little bit ago, and so it's been a while. I've finished your book, Profiles in Mental Health Courage, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it because of the impact that it had. It's really a tough book to read and have to almost like experience secondhand some of the stories that go on in this book, but I really enjoyed it. So you guys need to make sure you check it out, Profiles in Mental Health Courage. But basically, your whole mission is to make people more aware, more educated about mental health crises, about addiction and things like that, because at least a quarter of all Americans struggle with mental illness, substance use disorder, or both. And I know you talk about how some people talk about them as separate illnesses, but it's really best understood together. And you really think that the inability for us to understand the actual challenges of these illnesses and to learn about them and empathize with them is a big epidemic as the diseases themselves. And the goal that you kind of have is to make aspects of dealing with these illnesses more understandable. You guys hope to make people understand how much courage it takes to endure the daily struggles for continued or improved mental health. And so I'm really hoping that we can further that mission a little bit here today by educating some people. So I kind of want to start out the conversation by trying to frame things up with, how do you parse out like the vocabulary of mental health? For example, sometimes we say mental health, sometimes people use mental illness, sometimes people use mental disorder. Like, how do you kind of parse out the vocabulary and how to properly define things or use the proper verbiage?
Excellent question. So in the past, we only think about this issue as an issue that concerns people with mental illness or addiction. So we have mental illness, and then you have mental health. But within the spectrum of mental health, you can be mentally unhealthy, but you don't necessarily have a mental illness. And our advocacy has been focused principally on those with the most severe diagnoses, understandably. But what that's left our country with a lack of appreciation for how all of us can use better mental health, because it's like everything. You're a physical fitness guru. Like, we need a mental fitness guru. Like, I'll tell you a story. I had the honor of rededicating the Fort Bragg Special Warfare Center, where they train all the Green Berets, a number of years ago. I was on the Armed Services Committee, but the reason I was invited to be the guest speaker was because the Fort Bragg Special Warfare Center is named for my uncle, President Kennedy, who was the one that awarded the wearing of the Green Beret. So I went around, and saw the training. It's just incredible. I mean, Green Berets are just awesome, right? It's the SEALs and Delta, all of these special operators. But the general at the time, Hugh Shelton, who took me around Special Operations Command, he said to me, he saw my CV, which was saying I'm a big champion of mental health. And so he said, "Congressman, we have more mental health for our Green Berets than any other branch of the service." And I'm thinking to myself, listen, General, you know, you don't have to worry about me. I'm going to vote for your appropriations. I'm going to support you because guess what? The name of this building is my uncle's name. I'm going to have to help you. I kind of like, hey, spare me the pitch because we all know Green Berets do not need mental health. These guys jump out of airplanes and land in the water in the dead of night. They swim for 5 miles without breathing. You know, they hit the beach. You know, they speak 6 languages. They take out their target and they're home reading to their kids at bedtime. I mean, these guys are like last people you would think need mental health. But he said, Congressman, we don't look at mental health as anything other than a force multiplier. And I'm like, wow, because, you know, my thinking, I'm fighting for people like me who've suffered from addiction. My family's all suffered from addiction and mental illness and trauma. I had no concept, even me, who's like trying to be someone out there who's changing the way people look at this. It still was a foreign concept to me that mental health was a force multiplier. Like, isn't it only for those people with real debilitating illness? And it was ironic because he taught me that no, mental health is about everybody, wherever you are on the spectrum, whether you're unwell, whether you're actually ill, or whether you're mentally healthy, but want to go that extra mile like the Green Berets and be a peak performance. And so I asked him more. I said, well, why are these Green Berets? And he said, we can't send in our Green Berets and have those soldiers have any other thought on their mind besides the mission at hand. He said, because if they take their focus off of the mission just for a split second, it could cost everybody their life. And I'm like, wow. He said, so we have to train them on how to overcome their intrusive thoughts. So, Nick, I mean, we all have intrusive thoughts, right? It's when, like, I get up in the middle of the night and my head starts racing about, did I respond to that email, or did I do this, or did I finish calling this person? Or I'll start to ruminate over some bad experience the day before, or I'll start fearing up about something that's going to happen that I don't know really whether it's going or not tomorrow. In other words, our brains are, you know, always in kind of a fight or flight response. You cannot have your brain in that space if you're about to be tasked with a mission that is going to consume every bit of your awareness and concentration. So they actually train the Green Berets how to address their counterproductive thinking patterns. Like, they can't be thinking, oh, I wonder if my spouse is sleeping with someone else back at base while I'm over in the middle of the jungles and, you know, or the deserts, and you know, that they cannot be worried, you know, is my kid being bullied at school? You know, my kids are on food stamps because they don't pay, you know, our military men and women a livable wage. Anyway, my point is that it was so instructive to me. And I thought to myself, if the Green Berets could go out there and tell Fortune 100, 500 companies, guess what? Mental health is the differentiator between your average soldier and a special operator, because they're all fit, right? Physically, you know, Nick, they're all in great shape. But what makes a special operator special is their mental fitness, their ability to overcome stresses and challenges that come with their very trying job, and be able to navigate those feelings and stressors and counterproductive thinking patterns in the midst of their job so that they can maximize their effectiveness. Now, if you gave that message to HR directors and CEOs across the country, they'd be insisting about bringing in your program for physical fitness and layering on top of it a whole program for mental fitness, because the office environment of the future, Nick, is a combination of both. And we frankly only are beginning to appreciate what mental fitness looks like, because we've really traditionally only looked at mental health as a negative, in a negative spotlight. So I believe in, frankly, building within our education system a way to train our kids to manage stress. And, they don't train our kids this. So, how do we deal with, coping? How do we deal with problem solving? And helping kids manage this so that as they grow up, they can get stronger and stronger and stronger, which we need our kids to be stronger because, as we know, when they aren't strong, then they succumb to mental illness because the stress starts to create a pathology of depression, anxiety, and then they might self-medicate, and then they might become addicted to whatever they're self-medicating with, and then it's a spiral. So much of mental health and actually avoidance of mental illness will come if we're better prepared to understand our brains and better be able to prepare ourselves for the things that life throws our way.
Man, what an awesome way to kick off the episode. I love that perspective change because you're right. Like when people use mental health, they usually think about it from the spectrum of like, as bad as it can be to stable rather than all the way up to as strong as it can possibly be and then some, right? Like I love how you say that mental health can be a force multiplier for all of us, no matter what it is that we do, whether we're Green Berets or a classroom teacher or whatnot. And then I really think that you hit the nail on the head where it needs to be part of the education that everybody gets growing up. And so you told me before the episode, you've got 5 kids, 16, 12, 10, 8, and 6. What have been some things that you've done as a father to help foster some of their mental fortitude, some of their mental strength, so that they are more able and equipped to cope with stressors, etc.?
Well, I am trying to provide them a emotional foundation that's solid. So I'm married. I'm faithful to my wife. I mean, it sounds so silly to be able to say that, but in a world where there's real record high divorce rates and where people have a whole new concept of relationships, I am intentional about trying to be the best spouse I can be and be attentive to her needs because it's part of I grew up in a very chaotic, emotionally chaotic home. So, my goal in life is to try to turn down that noise wherever possible with our kids at the early ages, because they need, like anything, a strong foundation. When you build a house, you need to really have strong foundation because otherwise the stuff is not going to hold. And I spent a better part of my life trying to rebuild myself after the founding structure was built on very soft quicksand. And I don't want to have to try to, if I can prevent it, have to come back and struggle with my kids in their 20s as they're recovering from addiction and they're caught up in gambling addiction or pornography addiction or alcohol or opioids or stimulants. I mean, any number of addictions, right? They're food addictions. The point is, I don't want them to be offline. And I've seen so many young people today have, like, quote unquote, the failure to launch, have a really tough time because, listen, they're growing up, they've grown up with technology. That definitely has created problems with them for socialization because they've spent so much time on technology. I mean, I have all I can do to not let my brain go down the rabbit hole of social media. I don't do social media like TikTok or Instagram, but I do like to go to the news feeds and read all the latest toxic political BS that's coming out of Washington. That's not good for me, right? And so I have to be intentional because I'm in recovery. Like, if you ask, people are saying, well, why is he so, into all of this stuff? Because I don't want to drink or drug again. And I've spent a better part of my life consumed with the disease of addiction. And for me to not go back to that, I have to go upstream and start to address the things that leave me feeling anxious and depressed, which are getting like distracted or starting some kind of counterproductive, compulsive thinking, obsessive thinking upstream before I even pick up a drug or a booze. And so, I think if our kids, in my case, get that solid both guardrails, so they have to be disciplined, but they have to be loved. They have to know, that they're not going to control the thing, that they're, living with some boundaries. And so I just feel that will give them some agency, some structure, and some unconditional love. So I hold my kids all the time. I love being physical with them. One of the great things that my dad did for me was be very physically present for me, which even though he was, from another generation where they didn't really always know how to talk about feelings and emotions and all the rest, he was very loving in that way. And so, I kiss and embrace my kids all the time. I tell them that I love them. And I put my phone down when I'm around. Like I'm intentional about that. I go and do, like for example, the other day after school, I just took my kids out to a field. Like, usually the routine is like bring them back, they get their snacks and they get ready for their after school activities. And it was such a nice warm day. And I just decided to take a turn and go outside. And I said, we're all running outside. Let's go, let's go. And they all ran out and they're, why are we doing this, Daddy? And then 5 minutes later, they're jumping off of this, they're jumping off of that, they're chasing each other through the trees and the grasses and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, that instinct to immediately get them into outside. I was just, anyway, so I don't think I have like this rote, like, here's the checklist.
Yeah, of course.
But I do think, Nick, that there needs to be a handbook. So we always say there's no handbook to being a parent.
Yeah, of course.
Perhaps there should be, right?
Yeah.
Because it is like an important job and we don't get any instructional manual. But I think most parents, if they're given the tools, would want to take advantage of whatever the best interventions are to help their kids. They just don't have it present. So we definitely need to fix that too.
Get first access to registration for the January 2025 10-week transformation and get 50% off a personalized meal plan. What's up, you guys? This is Nick Carrier, body optimization coach and creator of the 10WT. And I am really excited to announce that for the January 20th 10-week transformation, you can sign up for the 10WT waitlist. And what does that do for you? Two things, two benefits, two perks. Number one is you're gonna get first access to registration. The in-person 10-week transformation only has so many spots. There's a 5 a.m. group, 6 a.m. group, 10 a.m. group, and they're in super high demand. And it's the beginning of the year, so a lot of people are gonna wanna get in so they can get healthier and get more fit to kick off the year. And I don't want you to miss out on your opportunity. From January 20th to March 28th, you can partake in the next session of the 10-week transformation. But you wanna get on the wait list so you can be first notified when registration opens. If you don't, you might miss out on your opportunity, because there's gonna be a window of time when only people on the wait list can register, and then after that it gets opened up to everybody. And so you don't wanna miss out on this opportunity. So sign up for the wait list going to nickcarrier.com/10WT waitlist. Also, the second big perk of it is you'll get 50% off a personalized meal plan. You'll get a breakfast, lunch, and dinner recipe for every single day for 10 straight weeks in order to accelerate your results. But that is only an offer for people who get on the wait list. So go to nickcarrier.com/10WT waitlist. Again, nickcarrier.com/10WT waitlist to get first access and 50% off a personalized meal plan so you can start off 2025 looking and feeling your best yet. No, I love it. I love it. I love how you said, you give them guardrails so they have some, boundaries within to work within, to provide them with love, obviously like physical love, like touching them, giving them hugs, being present with them. Where do you think is, or how do you approach the role? I feel like a lot gets talked about of ensuring your kids feel allowed to express their emotions and they're not just keeping it all within. What is the importance of that, and how do you actually go about maybe inviting your kids to share their feelings in the household?
Well, I am very open about my going to 12-step meetings, being in recovery. I'm very fortunate because my life involves advocacy and mental health. They're surrounded by discussions about emotional health, mental health. And of course, I'm sure all of my 12-step work kind of comes, through a lot of my language and things of that sort. So I I really try to have a discussion with them. I'm not like sitting down and saying, "Oh, don't use drugs," and but I'm always telling them about experiences that I've had where and point out with their friends, because that's always a teachable moment, like where they tell me a story about a kid acting out in school, and I'm like, I'm wondering why that might be. You know, do you know anything about his siblings? Oh, well, they don't really have a stable place to live and they're doing. So I get to have a conversation on any number of things. And the opportunities are there throughout the day. You just have to be aware.
Yeah. No, I think that goes back to what you said. Like if you're present with them, the opportunities for conversations are there, and just asking thought-provoking questions to them can help to open up conversation, help to open up thoughts and feelings and stuff like that. I think that's great for somebody who is experiencing a lot of anxiety right now, maybe some sort of depression. I guess like from my understanding of how you previously went about kind of describing mental health versus mental illness sounds like it's something that's a little bit more like defined, or it's clinical, or there is a diagnosis that is given. Let's say we're still kind of in the mental health spectrum, if you will, and somebody's kind of on the higher end of like a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of depression. What are some of the things that you've learned through your journey and through the 12-step program that can be useful tools for the people who are experiencing that right now, whether like it's switching thought patterns, whether it's talking to other people, whether it's self-care practices? What are some things that you've found useful for yourself and others?
So we're really it's a new frontier in this whole mental health world. We're just starting to embrace what are best practices. Honest to God, a majority of mental health delivered in this country is not, evidence-based, because the training for clinicians is often, for some classes, very theoretical. And I went to best psychiatrists in the world, but I did a lot of the analysis, which was me just thinking about all the things that hadn't gone my way and ruminating around them, which doesn't get you anywhere, right? And so in recovery, you're all about act your way to a new way of thinking. So I can either get feared up and hold up and draw the blinds, close the door, and not move, figuratively and literally, or I can do something that's uncomfortable and I can begin to change my thought pattern. So that's why in recovery, our goal is not to help ourselves, it's to help the next sick and suffering person, because we get relief when we're thinking about helping someone else.
Mm.
We get outside our own, neuroses and self-centered thinking, and by how we help another. Plus, it gives us some perspective between our own challenges and other people's challenges when we open ourselves to help others. Plus, it gives us a feeling of self-esteem and worth if we can help someone else. So I think service, whether it's service in a mental health way or just service in general, like I try to throughout the day, do things for people. I go and, I want to pat myself on the back because it's people scream. They hear me say that I, do the laundry, switch, do the, dishes, ask my wife, can I get her something, take my kids, open the door for someone, like little stuff, like is a reminder that I get feedback right away when I'm nice to others. They're nice to me. Like it's amazing how other people reflect that. So all of that can help relieve that kind of bondage of self, that anxiety and depression. Obviously, if it's clinical, you want to get a physician and clinician to really treat you. And it is brain-based. So don't assume that you can just, as I said, think your way out of it, right?
Yeah.
People, or pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So I'm also on antidepressants because I do have like kind of a chemical imbalance. And I see a therapist, and as I said, go 12-step meetings. And as we talked about before the show, I work out. Like, physical exercise does so much to relieve my anxiety and depression. I mean, it is the most powerful thing I have in my arsenal to feel better, is to get a good workout in the morning. So, I would, but the thing that I co-founded a company called Psych Hub, and it has a lot of micro videos to help people learn about all these different types of diagnoses and what to expect from treatment if they get treatment, and how treatment is supposed to work. Because I think, Nick, there's a lot of illiteracy around, well, what is mental health treatment? Like, what does it entail? And as I said, it's different for different diagnoses, but the fundamentals are, you have to do homework. It's not like you sit back and wait for the therapist to fix you. You have to do work to change the way you think. And as I said, the only way to change your thinking is to do things that are uncomfortable, because that breaks the thought patterns in your head, because you're basically busting through, that anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
And that's why I think actually trying to be helpful to someone else is a real solid go-to for me whenever I'm not feeling up to speed.
I love it. Yeah, you get out of yourself, and you get out of your own issues, and you are focusing on somebody else's issues. And therefore, when you do it, and then you also get feedback of like, hey, you're somebody who's valuable in this world and you're doing some good things. So I love the concept of not thinking into a new way of acting, but acting your way into a new way of thinking, and being service oriented being a number one way to do that. On the spectrum of mental health and to mental illness, when does somebody know, or when does somebody have an idea of when maybe I'm not in mental health anymore? Maybe I am experiencing mental illness. Maybe there is some sort of chemical imbalance. Maybe just acting my way into a new way of thinking is not going to be enough for me, and I need to actually get treated. Like, how do we know when we've kind of crossed that threshold, if you will, or if that's the right way to say it?
No, it's a terrific question. It is at the heart of our mental health and addiction crisis right now in the country. And that is the single characteristic overriding all of both addiction and mental illness, is a lack of insight on the person who is suffering. I totally thought I was managing my addiction, right? I'd get some Adderall in the morning, some Red Bull. I'd hit my benzodiazepines. I had some Oxycontins. I'd be drinking at, dinner time. I'd be, so there's like, you're kind of, and I thought I had it all under control because I was titrating everything in order to keep me on track. And that type of thinking, I mean, like, I didn't know how far off I was, like how totally delusional I was to think that was a normal way of living. And I had to, frankly, I had a couple of DWIs and a bunch of quote unquote moments of clarity when I realized, like, my life is not in control and I am in desperate need of some serious help. In recovery, you have to want it, right? There's millions and millions of people who need recovery. But in order to really be successful, you have to want it. Now, to want it, you have to also be freed from the shackles of that chemical dependency that comes with addiction. So you need, in many cases, some kind of both detox and inpatient, and strong, certainly outpatient. But we also need time. Like, I'm a big proponent of sober housing. I think instead of having kind of people just go into rehab for a short period of time, their brain has not rewired, in my view. It takes time. We in insurance we do not pay for, sober housing. And we don't pay for psychosocial supports like community centers for people in recovery to get together, socialize, get connected to job training, housing, and everything else. I think we need to build a different system, not just a medical system, but a social support system that has the medical as part of it. We're just over reliant on just the medical piece. Now, we need the medical piece to kind of, as I said, break through that first area so that you can actually start the mental health work. Because your body, whether you have a psychosis or whether you have severe addiction, needs to get treated, through medication and really serious therapy. Then you can start to work on all of the other things that are going to help you in recovery. Recovery is something different. So I would say when people are facing real obstacles in living their lives, that's a pretty good sign that your life is disabled by your depression, by your anxiety, your inability to really function in an optimal way. And of course, you can check the chaos around you, your relationship with your family, your friends, coworkers. Are you getting into legal trouble?
So you feel like if it's interfering, if it's very obviously interfering with other areas of your life, that can be a relatively good indication of like maybe something else is deeper is going on here and might need to get some serious treatment or being looked at or whatnot.
Exactly. But, we really hate people with these illnesses because we say to ourselves, why can't they just get a good swift kick in the ass and pull themselves up by their bootstraps? When you have these illnesses, you've lost the power of choice. You are hostage. It's the reason, like you say to yourself, how in the world, after all the news about addiction, could so many people still be dying of it? So many people still be suffering from it. I mean, haven't we learned? Well, the problem is some of us have a predisposition. So, you could get addicted, as I said, to gambling. Like that's going to be a major source of future addiction. And by the way, the highest correlation to suicide is gambling addiction. It's not any other type of addiction.
Wow.
And I'm saying that because you're very into fitness and sports and all the rest. Young men are going to be very vulnerable because they're growing up now. College sports, athletics, professional sports, it's now being consumed by sports betting. I think it's very, very dangerous. And it's going to be a big mental health issue. I hope with your, leadership as you have been in the fitness area, that is something you start to factor in. In fact, I'd love to connect you with some people. I have one of the top rugby players in Ireland gambled away $5 million, was at the end of his rope, ready to kill himself. He managed to, survive that. Now he's made his life trying to address gambling addiction. And, he wrote this thing on social media, and now he's got NFL players, collegiate athletes all reaching out to him. And he's in Ireland, but they're all reaching out to him because they don't know where to go for help and how to address that. But people who are high performers, who like that, feeling that they get from going that extra mile, are also people who may be vulnerable to that, thrill response that gambling can be. So I'm just throwing that out there because you're in a position where you could help lead on that too.
Yeah, no, so that's very insightful to know. I didn't realize that was like the highest addiction or the highest addiction that is correlated with suicide. That it makes a lot of sense, and it is crazy to think that, knowing that sports betting is continued to have commercials run daily on, it's ridiculous. Like I just don't understand the precedent that sports betting just sets the worst precedent from so many different issues, and we could go down a rabbit hole of that. But for the sake of today's conversation, we're not going to. I want to come back to mental health issues. Do you feel like, and I'm going to insert something here, do you feel like it's more prevalent today than it ever has been? And one of my kind of like thoughts around this idea is that today we live in the easiest society. We live in the time of the world, of the planet, where it's easiest to survive than ever before. It's easier to survive now than ever before from the standpoint of like, we don't really have that many life-threatening issues from things like other predators, etc. And therefore, and like we're not farming. We don't have these constant problems that we're having to deal with. And I think that oftentimes our focus dictates our emotions and our mental state. And so like we were always in the past having to focus on all these problems that we're having to solve and potential predators, etc. And now we don't have those things. And now oftentimes our focus turns to internal and focus turns to us. And so like that's just kind of like a theory as to why I feel like we oftentimes do actually experience more mental health issues today than we did in the past, because it's like our focus is turned in on us rather than on external issues and external problems or whatnot. So kind of like with my little thoughts inserted in there, what are your thoughts on, is it more prevalent today or is it actually just more talked about today?
No, I think it's greatly prevalent, more prevalent than ever before. I think your assessment is right on. I think obviously, as I mentioned, technology has clearly been the biggest experiment that no kid has ever given their approval of, and yet they're the subjects of this experiment. It's going to have major ramifications for the rest of our lives for those that grew up on technology. And really for everyone, we really have to think this through, because our brains were not meant to have this kind of level of stimulation. And so that's part of it. And the disconnectedness in society, because we're now not talking to each other and socializing in the way that traditionally we have in previous generations. Um, but I would also say these are also the illnesses have been around forever. Like when my book, going back to my profiles in mental health courage, it was, the title came from President Kennedy's Profiles in Courage. And I decided to look at the senators that he featured in his book, which was about political courage. And I found John Quincy Adams, our president of the United States, lost two of his brothers to alcoholism and his son to suicide at age 28. You had a whole host of other, Daniel Webster, great U.S. Senator, died of cirrhosis of the liver. Sam Houston, first president of Texas and a later U.S. Senator, was known as the big drunk. Lucius Lamar saw his father take his life in front of his house after coming in the house in the front door, writing a little note, walking out and taking a pistol out and shooting himself. Like, these are all the people that President Kennedy featured in his book Profiles in Courage, because all of them were like super courageous politically. At that time, even when President Kennedy wrote this in the late 50s, no one would ever think of digging into their backgrounds. Like, what relevance does that have? But the point I want to make is that these have been around forever. These illnesses have been around forever. And as we know from our families, alcoholism has just been around from the beginning of time. And it's really shocking. It's taken us until this day and age to like think, well, maybe we should start to take this seriously. I mean, when you think about how many family members it has taken out through premature death and through suffering and disability, it's shocking. We are so wanting as consumers in America to make a better life for ourselves. And yet we totally block out this part of our lives that is so essential to our success and happiness and fulfillment, which is the mental health part. And we keep it silent. We don't talk about it. Shh. And you know what? It gets worse when that happens. So we have to figure out how to tell our stories in a way that is non-stigmatizing, that opens up the conversation, which is why people should read my book, Profiles in Mental Health Courage. And it's got all the best critics' reviews, because I partnered with a professional journalist who knows how to write, and specifically around mental health. I got 12 people who not only share everything about their own journeys, but I talk to their spouses, their kids, their parents, their coworkers, which often, Nick, is left out of any of these narratives, because these are illnesses that affect the whole family, right? If I never got addiction myself, I'd still be disabled by the fact I grew up with two parents who suffered tremendously from alcoholism, one who was totally debilitated by it. And the chaos in my home because of that has really impacted my emotional choices, thinking, decisions. It affects your whole life. And so what I'm saying is, like, we really have to be like I support this national organization for children of alcoholics because everybody is impacted by their environment, and who's going to impact you more than your parents?
Right.
So I'm just trying to say here, there's lots that we need to be focused on in this space. And unfortunately, Nick, up until COVID, this was really just the purview of quote unquote those special mental health advocates. Really, what it needs to be is the purview of everybody. Business needs to be about this, athletics, education. Frankly, the military can't recruit people because they can't pass a drug test. We cannot meet our recruiting goals. This is an issue affects every aspect of our nation's well-being, its economy, its health. Our criminal justice system is rife because it's essentially the default for lack of a public health system for mental health and addiction. And we still stick our heads in the sand on this. And so if people read Profiles of Mental Health Courage, they'll learn about various stories. It's messy. There's nothing easy about this, but they get a better appreciation for the complexity of these illnesses. Doesn't mean we can't treat them. I just want people to have eyes wide open. And I also, for those who are suffering, I want them to not feel alone. And when they read other people's experiences, they'll say, hey, geez, I'm right in the middle here. No one else is any different than me, which I think is helpful for them not feeling so isolated. And in the back of my book, I have a QR code if people care about changing public policy, because that's my expertise. And I really want to build a political movement where people can advocate effectively for a different system in education and healthcare and every other area for a better mental health system for our country.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it takes going to take like a societal and cultural awareness and change, because this is one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue that we're actually experiencing right now. I think oftentimes people feel like at all times, my biggest issue that I'm experiencing is that I'm not going to have enough money to live. And so then they think I'm going to prioritize the majority of my time to making money so I can live. And it's like, obviously it depends on the person, but for a lot of us, that's not the primary thing that might wipe us out. It's going to be mental health or physical health. And so I think it's just really important for people to actually understand that that is one of our biggest issues that we need to counteract and prevent. And so we need to allocate time in our calendars for it. We need to allocate time in our calendars specifically for mental health and having conversations with people and physical health and exercise and cooking and things like that. Like, I think it needs to take a shift in our culture, a shift in our society to encourage, like, this actually needs time in our calendar. But I do want to get your thoughts on one last thing. And it's a pretty common question, but I want to hear your take on it. And this is, I feel like a thought for a lot of people have. Let's say I'm a family member and I'm not necessarily struggling with mental health stuff as much, but I know that somebody else in my family is, whether it's a sibling, a parent, a child, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, you name it. I think oftentimes people feel like I would love to help. I would love to say something, but I'm not exactly sure how to bring up the conversation. And obviously it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, because somebody, if you ask them a certain question, maybe they'll react a different way than somebody else. But what is your advice to people who are a family member or a close friend of somebody who they feel like is experiencing some mental health issues, for how you can navigate that situation and how you can bring up conversations so that people feel like they have actual support in their journey?
Well, I think that, as in the analogy of the plane, where the flight attendant says, put your own mask on first before helping others, right? Because you're not going to be of any help to others if you're in your own head suffering. Because frankly, these are family illnesses. So with someone suffering, everybody in the family is suffering. And we get into our reactive brains where, our amygdala is like, shouting in their head at these people for not changing, and, getting all anxious and uptight and worried. And putting their own mental health in jeopardy because they're trying to control an illness that's not controllable through their intervention. And so they have to learn about how to help self-regulate themselves. Now, that's not being selfish. They're going to be more helpful to their loved one if they're in a place where their loved one, believe me, will have eyes on them and know whether they're doing something that they want a part of. Like the best, pain and love are our best disciplinarians. Pain because they gets us to the realization we need to change, and love because it moves us to want to get something that we want more of. And so the experience of someone who is solid, in my experience, I am gravitating towards those people because I want what they have. And so if people are models, and we all have to understand this in our lives, we are the model for people around us, and people are pick up on the little things. So if we're healthier, if we're more engaged, if we're more centered and connected, believe me, we're going to attract people because people want that. And if you're sick, you're going to see that. So you're going to be more open to this person who's your loved one, maybe asking for help. You're not going to have to go to them and say, what can I do to help you per se? Ideally, you're going to in a place, if you're working on yourself, where they're going to say, can you help me? Because they're going to see the light in you, and they're going to know you got some stability that they're going to want. And when they ask for help, that's when you need to move. And my whole life is trying to get insurance companies to pay for care when someone needs help. And that's why I wrote the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, which was signed into law in 2008. And I've worked ever since to try to get it enforced, because we only have a moment when people are asking for help to really get them and then start to turn their lives around, because these diseases come right back with a vengeance. And tomorrow, you're not going to feel the same way about whatever that was when you had a moment where, like, I do want to change. I do want to get off this terrible track, and I want to get into something different. So, but listen, Nick, this has been fantastic. I love what you do to try to change people and their ideas of health overall. And I'm so grateful you're focused on mental health as part of your, kind of education to those that you're interested in reaching about the importance of overall health. So really been a thrill to be with you.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's been a thrill to be with you as well. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I know a lot of people have as well. You guys need to make sure you go get this book, Profiles in Mental Health Courage. Again, it's a tough read from the standpoint of hearing people's stories and what a lot of people have had to deal with, but it's so insightful, and it's going to leave you both empathetic and passionate about this topic. And if you're somebody who is dealing with something, it's going to feel like you have some camaraderie, like you're not alone in this scenario. So Profiles in Mental Health Courage, go grab it today. We'll have that in the show notes. You can also go to his website, patrickjkennedy.net, to learn more about him and all the things that he's got going on. But where else should people go to learn more about you and support all this work that you're doing?
So the Kennedy Forum, named for when my uncle signed the Community Mental Health Act. That's when I started this, the 50th anniversary. And the idea is how do we build an advocacy movement commensurate with the demands that our country has today to really improve its mental health. And if you're an NRA member, if you're a labor union member, if you're a Chamber of Commerce member, you all know that there's organization if you want to be effective. We're not organized in our space. That's what I'm trying to work on doing. So it's going to be a long-term effort. So if people are interested, I look forward to working with them. I work with all of my colleagues in NAMI, Mental Health America, Active Minds, both APAs. There's a lot of folks out there, but this is just still the beginning of a movement. So please be involved. This doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a psychologist, a mental health, someone who's in recovery to care about this. All of us have a stake in it.
I love it. I love it. It's only going to continue to be more important. And like you said, it's also not just the negative side of things. It can also be a force multiplier. And when people really realize that it can be a force multiplier, whether you're a Green Beret or just a stay-at-home mom, not just a stay-at-home mom, but you know what I mean. No matter where you are with regards to what you do, it can be a force multiplier. So you guys need to make sure you go grab the book. You need to make sure you go look more into Patrick Kennedy's work. And if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button so you are notified of the new episodes coming out. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe below. And also, if you got something from today's episode, share this episode with a friend or family member so you can help spread the education around the topic of mental health and mental illness, because that is the journey that we all need to continue to be on, to educate more so we can all be more empathetic to ourselves and to others who are navigating their mental health journey. But Patrick, that's all we got today, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nick. Have a great one.
You too. What an insightful episode with Patrick. His perspective on mental health as a journey of growth and resilience was incredibly valuable, reminding all of us the importance of building mental health, not just restoring it. His tips on managing intrusive thoughts and supporting loved ones facing mental health challenges offered practical takeaways for anybody who's looking to strengthen their own emotional well-being or help their family members or friends strengthen theirs. Before we go, don't forget to follow the show on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button down below. That way you guys get notifications each time new, impactful, life-transforming episodes come out. Here are my 3 biggest takeaways from today's episodes. Mental health is not just something to come from a place of deficiency. It's also a place to come from a place of abundance, to grow, to use it as a source of strength. Like Patrick talked about, he talked about that story with the Green Berets, that you can have mental health be a force multiplier. I absolutely loved that concept. My second biggest takeaway is strategies for dealing with intrusive thoughts. He talks a lot about focus. And he talks a lot about how when we have intrusive thoughts, get out of your own head and go serve somebody else. Go help somebody else, and that can help you in a big way. And then third and finally, the biggest takeaway is about supporting loved ones. He talks about how being a model for what mental health is supposed to look like is the first big step that you can take. Putting on your own mask before you put on theirs. Modeling that behavior can allow the person who might be struggling the permission to come to you and ask you for help, and that way you can initiate some great conversations from there. If you can do these things, you'll continue to get closer to the healthiest version of yourself and ultimately closer and closer to your best you.